Hello again, I'm Chuck Tutt, and welcome to another episode of Meet the Press Reports. Today we are asking, what is a living wage in the United States? The answer depends quite a bit on where you live. Obviously, it's much less expensive to live in York, Pennsylvania than it is to live in New York City. And the minimum wage doesn't come close to the living wage just about anywhere, New York or York. The way people feel about their own economic circumstances can also be a factor in how they vote. So we wanted to know, how are they feeling and are they making ends meet? MSNBC's Lindsay Reiser and producer Andrew Basson set out to talk to people and ask that very question. What do they consider a living wage where they live? Well, Lindsay joins me now. Lindsay, what'd you find out?
Well, Chuck, we went to two different states. We went to Ohio and Florida to hear from different families sharing similar struggles. A couple $100s of wiggle room, so saving, paying off debt, or investing, those are all out of the picture. And don't get me wrong, their lives are full, but they don't have a security cushion to deal with whatever comes their way, from a higher grocery bill to an oil change. Kanika Williams is a single mom of 4 boys living in Cleveland, Ohio. She has 3 part-time jobs, cleaning homes, delivering food with DoorDash, and sorting mail for UPS. She's active at her kids' schools, cooks them dinner every night, and stays present in their lives.
Being around my kids, that's like the number one. So my kids motivate me. I want us to have stuff. I want us to do stuff.
Kanika puts her life together like sections of a quilt, caring for her sons, making money, spending time with friends. Each piece is sewn together intentionally.
When I have a roof over my head, I know when my small, necessary bills are paid. Necessary meaning lights, water, gas, insurance, rent. I'm not talking about Netflix or any of those wanted things. Once I have those things taken care of, I have freedom.
Kanika has a medical technician degree, and the rise of gig work has given people like Kanika some level of autonomy. But she reminisces about how things used to be for previous generations. Her mother, Brenda, just retired from her decades-long job as a janitor at an elementary school.
I went to that school when I was in 1st grade. And that's where she's retiring from. So those 30-year jobs, those 40-year jobs are gone for us unless we start right now.
Between her gig work at $20 an hour and her UPS job at $16.50 an hour, both above Ohio minimum wage, she says she brings home roughly $1,500 a month. What is your definition of a living wage?
Being able to afford your bill, your monthly bills, being able to put a portion back for savings. And I think for me, in my household, if I was to make $3,500 a month.
What would that extra money, what would that get you?
That'll get all bills paid, a little bit in the bank, and maybe that oil change, I might need it, you know?
Union trouble.
The debate over how much workers should get paid in America has a contentious history. It took decades of strikes, debates, and a Great Depression for Congress to pass a law in 1938 establishing a federal minimum wage. The federal minimum wage was last raised to $7.25 an hour in 2009, and wage growth has not kept pace with labor productivity. So workers are more efficient, but they have less to show for it, studies have found. Since 1980, most American workers have seen modest income growth, but income for the top 1% has grown much faster.
Everybody who works for a living deserves to be paid a wage that honors the value of the work that they're doing and meets the cost of living.
Michael Shields is a researcher for Policy Matters Ohio, a liberal nonprofit economic policy institute.
For the last several decades, there's been a real disconnect between how much wealth working people are producing and what's being reflected in their pay.
What do you attribute that to?
I think it comes down to power. Larger share of all of the wealth that's produced in our economy is being consolidated by the very wealthy and by corporations as well. Working people are being less successful than they have in the past in bargaining for their share of the wealth that they make possible.
How did you guys meet?
We met upstate New York.
We were just friends at first. I actually told my friend I was working with
that the guy who trained me was really cute, but too short for me. And then we made plans to hang out on a Saturday. And everyone we were working was just like, is it a date? Is it a date? I think we got home at like 1, 2 in the morning.
That's a good date. So you got over the height thing.
Yeah.
When Taylor and Maggie Mendez started a new life in Florida, things were bumpy. Maggie working overnights at Dunkin', making $11 an hour, which at the time was $1 above the state's minimum wage. Taylor was working a factory job, and both DoorDashed on the side.
We went through some hard times, but it built character, and it made us a lot stronger than we were before.
Then Taylor got a job, a teller at TD Bank in Melbourne, Florida. A group called Family Promise helped them with emergency shelter and meals and taught them how to budget. Taylor's new boss helped them find housing.
Once I got into banking, I knew that it was that the skies were the limit from there.
But between his job, Maggie's overnight shift, and taking care of their 2 little ones, they never saw each other. Then their daughter got into a brand new school, but there's no bus. So Maggie quit her job to watch the kids and drive their daughter to and from school every day.
Have a good day, sweetheart.
You should always try to appreciate what you have, The prices of everything, of cars, of food, of housing, has gone up so much, and income has not gone up a drop. I'm making a decent wage for what I make, and there's a lot of people making a lot less than I do, and I have no idea how they're making it.
Staggering new inflation numbers out today.
While high inflation has been making headlines since 2021, it certainly is not the first time in our country's history.
Public enemy number one, inflation in 1974.
Inflation has risen steadily since 2005, reaching a 40-year high in 2022, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics says. At the same time, real wages adjusted for inflation have only risen slightly. That's led to a growing call to raise the minimum wage from $7.25 to $15 an hour. Congress has debated the issue, with proponents arguing it will lift people out of poverty.
No one should work as millions are doing today, 40 hours a week at a job, and still live below the poverty line.
And critics saying it will cost jobs.
If there is too much of an increase too rapidly, they will be forced to shrink their workforces.
30 states and 4 territories have already increased the minimum wage above federal law. New York is one of those states, and lawmakers have gone a step further, tying future increases to inflation. Howard Potter owns A&P Master Images, a design and printing company in Utica, New York. He didn't have an easy upbringing. Raised by a single mom, he bounced from home to home until he became a ward of the state.
As a person that lived in poverty at certain points, knows what it's like to go to food pantries, grow up in group homes, I didn't have someone hold my hand to tell me how to make something of myself.
After college, he says he was making good money at a factory, but he had a side hustle and a dream. So when he was 25, he cashed in his 401k and, with hard work and grit, built his printing company from the ground up with his wife.
In America, we kind of lose focus on what hard work really is. We think 40 hours a week is all that we should have to contribute. And then when you look back at the early 1900s and even after that, most people were working 60, 70, 80 hours a week to be broke.
Howard likes to say his employees are family. He instituted a 4-day work week and pays them $1 above the current state minimum wage of $14.20 an hour. But when the state raised the minimum wage, he spoke up against it.
You're kind of leaving small business owners no choice when the state makes those mandates, because they have to take on the cost. So they have to innovate and stay ahead. Otherwise, the only option is to keep increasing pricing and hope that their customers keep coming through the door.
Why does the increase in pay for employees automatically mean the product has to be more expensive?
It doesn't always necessarily guarantee that. But in most cases, if they have a high turnover or things of that nature, you got to pay to promote the job, get the next person in, all those costs increase.
Why is it that when a government forces a wage increase, that contributes to inflation, but when other businesses are doing it, forcing you to drive up your wages, that's not contributing to inflation?
Well, it's a very good question, because one, when you're doing it as a business, you're doing it in a timeline that you can afford to do it. So it's controlled costs. When the government does it, it's forced, it's not controlled.
Kanika pieces together different sources of income to keep food on the table.
I'm functioning on beans, I ain't got no rice. Just, But how we make it work is put back what you take out. Got to put it back. As we get out there, we make it happen. We find a way.
Taylor works 30 to 40 hours a week at the bank at $20.50 an hour. This works out to about $2,500 a month. Kanika, Taylor, and Maggie all get some form of government help, like food stamps, Medicaid, and rental assistance. The fact that neither family can make ends meet without help begs the question, what constitutes a living wage? MIT has a living wage calculator, which looks at the cost of 8 basic needs in each county in the U.S. According to that, Taylor would need to make $37.97 an hour to support his family, nearly twice his current wage.
I mean, it's surprising, but sadly it's not surprising.
Living in Cuyahoga County, Kanika, who makes less than $20 an hour, would need to make $40.44 an hour, or roughly $84,000 a year. She says she's afraid to lose her benefits if she makes too much money. Do you find, though, that the issue is if you make a certain amount, you won't be able to qualify for those anymore, but that extra amount doesn't replace the help you're getting?
It is exactly like that. They're going to take probably Medicaid or food stamps. So now when you take my food stamps, what I'm trying to build is gone. You're not allowing me to do what the program is meant for. And the program is meant for people getting back to stabilization.
Despite their constant financial struggles, Kanika, Taylor, and Maggie are doing what families do all the time, making the most of what they have. Kanika isn't immune from worry, but she doesn't let it rule her life.
You don't have to, just because you're living on minimum wage doesn't mean you have to act like you poor or you have to be all down and depressed all the time. Find the light in the dark and just keep moving forward because you can't stop.
All right, so remember that medical technician degree that I talked about Kanika having? Well, the reason why she pieces together these part-time jobs is because she has a felony on her record. She rented a car for 2 weeks past its due date. She thought it was paid for on her credit card. The rental company declared it stolen, and so now that felony is a red flag for employers.
And that's just a whole nother level. There's a lot of people that they've paid their debt to society, but society doesn't really let them come back.
She can't pay for an attorney to expunge her record.
That says a lot. I want to focus in on the issue of government assistance. It's there, but it's complicated. So you talked about it a little bit there, where Kanika, if she makes too much money, she loses something that then unravels the very carefully constructed financial life that she's put together.
I talked to some of her friends. They're amazed at all of the different programs that she's been able to find, and she qualifies for all of them. But the idea here is, okay, I'm never going to get ahead then if you take away some of these benefits from me. For Taylor and Maggie, they're a little less savvy, I would say. I mean, they basically, that Family Promise organization is what pointed them to all of these benefits, but they're really worried, for example, about losing their house. If they don't get the help that they're getting right now, those subsidies, they'll have to move.
What do they want government to do for them, basically? Do they have like a specific ask? Like if they had, their congressman right there, they have something, hey, can you do this for me? This would allow me to get back on my feet faster.
I asked both of them that, and neither of them had anything concrete. I mean, they're not expecting anybody to do anything for them. They're picking themselves up by the bootstraps, and they're working hard. I will say both of them have student loan debt. And now neither of them are going to get any kind of forgiveness from those plans. That is something Kanika specifically was hoping for, which obviously now with the Supreme Court ruling, we know won't happen.
Lindsay, this was a terrific piece, and it really was interesting. The small business owner was fascinating. I mean, he really, I think, reflected the tension that a small business owner has when it comes to paying a living wage.
And he and his wife, after 3 years, just gave themselves a modest raise. So he's like, it's not like I'm, out here living a grand life either.
All right, Lindsay Reiser, nice work.
Thank you.
All right. When we come back, you may remember Andrew Yang. He ran for president on the Democratic side in 2020. And he became known because he promoted giving every American adult, even billionaires, $1,000 a month. Does it sound controversial? It is to many. Andrew Yang joins me next. Welcome back. When Andrew Yang launched his long shot campaign for the Democratic presidential nomination in 2020, he ran an idea that some people called a gimmick, and he said was a game changer for millions, a universal basic income.
If you've heard anything about me and my campaign, you've heard that someone is running for president who wants to give every American $1,000 a month. GDP and corporate profits are at record highs in America today. Also at record highs, depression, financial insecurity, student loan debt. We are going through the greatest economic transformation in our country's history, the fourth industrial revolution, and it is pushing more and more of our people to the side.
Yang argued that far from being radical, guaranteeing money to all citizens was an American idea, from Thomas Paine to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Well, Andrew Yang joins me now from New Paltz. Mr. Yang, it's good to see you.
Hey, Chuck, how are you?
I'm great. Look, you saw our piece on a living wage. You, in some ways, were responding to something almost a little bit before it's become, I think, more mainstream. I think now, thanks to AI, post-pandemic, where, by the way, cash payments suddenly became a thing by the government, I think it's seen as a much more mainstream idea. So walk me through what the idea right now, the way you would try to implement it, if you could, in this moment.
Well, the single biggest example of universal basic income over the past number of months has been either the stimulus payments, which I dare say most Americans enjoyed and might have kept us out of a depression, but also the enhanced child tax credit that put money into parents' hands over 2020, 2021. Unfortunately, it got discontinued because Congress couldn't get its act together. But anyone who looks at those numbers sees that that money went straight to food and housing and fuel and school materials and kept millions of American children out of poverty. Unfortunately, we kicked them back into below the poverty line, and that pains me greatly. It also demonstrated just how little political voice the indigent have in America today.
Is that how you see the different ways? I mean, you made it simple by saying, look, it's going to be $1,000 for everybody. But if the government designed it as the child care tax credit for parents, maybe a retirement stipend in one hand that we call Social Security, right? Is that another way to implement this?
Oh, very much so. As you're suggesting, I ran for president on a very simple idea of $1,000 a month for every American adult. I do think AI is going to displace millions of American workers, and we're having a harder and harder time getting buying power into people's hands, as Lindsay's reporting profiled. But I'm a very practical person, and so I was advocating very much for the stimulus checks. I was advocating very much for the enhanced child tax credit. And if you were to put me in charge today, I would be trying all sorts of solutions to get more economic power into people's hands.
One of the hallmarks of your idea was it was going to be across the board. Is that still the best way to do this, or would you be more targeted about it now?
Well, one of the problems, Chuck, that millions of Americans experience, and the families are an example of this, there's a labyrinth of government programs that are often designed to be tough to access intentionally. When I was running for president, there were families in Iowa who lived in fear of volunteering because they had some disability payments or other government assistance, and they were afraid of having it taken away from them. And that's a terrible way to live, but millions of Americans live like that right now, where they're getting something from the government and they're fearful of it being taken away. So anything that streamlines and simplifies these programs is a win, because you have so many Americans right now who are outside of the economy looking in, and they feel like they have to stay there or else they're going to lose what meager aid they're getting.
So let's say we come to a form of universal basic income. How do you prevent corporate America from sort of taking advantage of that in wages and the wages that they end up offering, knowing, well, we know you start with a baseline of this, so we don't need to pay you this amount. This starting salary for this is now lower because we know people have basic needs met from the government.
Well, the theory is that if you have your basic needs met, then you actually can hold out a little bit more. You can bargain a little bit more, because right now there is a power imbalance and exploitation that occurs where employers are saying, look, take it or leave it, and you kind of can't leave it, so you're going to have to take it. But if you can imagine a world where, let's say, the waitress of the diner actually had a little bit she could fall back on, and if she's getting harassed or exploited, then she can say, you know what, I can actually take a few weeks and find a better situation. So the one of the inspirations for this plan was a guy named Andy Stern, who used to run the SEIU, who wrote a book called Raising the Floor. And his argument was that this would actually strengthen workers' bargaining power as opposed to getting them kicked to the curb, which presently happens.
But you were not an advocate for raising the minimum wage. Explain that.
I'm actually for raising the minimum wage. If you gave me a choice, I'd rather do something else. Because, well, I've run businesses, and I think no one should be working and be poor. And so if you're working and poor right now because the minimum wage is too low, we should raise it. But if you were to raise the minimum wage across the board, you would see some job reductions at the margins in certain environments. And there are small business owners right now that are just making ends meet, that if you say, hey, you have to pay your people more, then they'd cut shifts or in some cases maybe cut back. So I want to try and get more buying power into people's hands, but not necessarily put the onus on small business owners.
Right.
We have a lot of small business owners around the country who are not made of money. You know, that they're just getting by, and throwing another burden on them may not be the right way to go. But anything, you know, but if you say to me right now, would I be for raising the minimum wage, I would be.
I got you. I see where you're coming from. You just think it might be a better way to do it is doing universal basic income versus minimum wage. But at the end of the day, whatever it takes.
Yeah, I'd be for some kind of federal wage subsidy or augmentation too, where if you're working full time, the government throws $3 or $4 an hour into the pot. You know, it's one of the misconceptions about my presidential campaign is I think getting people back into the economy is vital. It's especially for men who have lower levels of education, who right now aren't working at higher levels. So anything that gets them plugged in is a win. But I think universal basic income would be one way to do that by giving people a leg up. But I'm for anything under the sun that would do the same.
Look, one of the hallmarks of why you were bringing this up is you've talked about we're headed for a massive job displacement. You can call it creative destruction, whatever you want to call it. And perhaps in 30 years, there'll be more jobs that need to be filled than what we're staring at now. But we know there's going to be a bunch of displacement to AI. Do we need to radically rethink what is a full-time job? Are we going to be cutting back 40 hours to 30 hours because we won't have enough jobs for humans? Is this a real issue we need to worry about over the next 20 years?
Oh, Chuck, I think it's going to hit very, very differently in different parts of the economy. But we do have to face facts that ChatGPT can write college-level papers in the blink of an eye. It's just going to get stronger and faster. There's about 40% of American jobs are either repetitive cognitive or repetitive manual and can be automated away. So there are certain segments that are going to see the need for labor reduced very, very sharply. And that adjustment is going to be extraordinarily painful for the people who are affected. So there is a need for a much, much bigger picture approach. Unfortunately, we have a government that's kind of stuck in the 60s and getting less functional, not more functional. But I would love to see us take bigger swings at this. It's mission critical. When you look back, you spent a lot of time crisscrossing Iowa. Iowa is filled with these towns that used to be known for Maytag or Pella Windows. You know where I'm going here, the manufacturing. Now, of course, a lot of those manufacturing towns ended up having opioid crisis and all this. Is there a lesson to be learned from that transition that maybe we need to, you see this fentanyl crisis now? Well, imagine that times another, 3 or 4x exponential displacement. Oh, 100%, Chuck. I mean, if you look at the voter district data, when you got rid of that Maytag plant, that community went straight to Trump. And so if you're concerned about political dysfunction, it's just going to rise and rise as more people are casting about and saying, what is the path forward for me? And if they don't see the path forward and they get presented with terrible leadership, then they take it. That's one of the reasons why we're struggling the way we are right now. We did not meaningfully address what happened to those 4 million manufacturing jobs in Iowa, Ohio, and other environments. And now it's going to hit other livelihoods in other communities.
You know, it's interesting that the Great Recession You, I think, saw the fallout from it when you were trying to campaign in Iowa. I don't think we fully appreciate how many people still haven't recovered from the Great Recession. Is that fair to say?
Completely. And like you said, you saw surges in deaths of despair, fentanyl overdoses. I met those families, and you asked them, how many of you have had an issue with overdoses in your family? Unfortunately, a majority of the hands would go up. And so then when you go to these people and say, look, things are working, they completely disagree. And that is rising in communities around the country that were left behind during the Great Recession.
Very quickly, do you fear that what happened with inflation short term and the fact that some people blame those stimulus checks for inflation is going to scare elected officials from doing what they did in early 2021?
I'm so glad you raised this, Chuck, because the stimulus checks amounted to maybe 15% of the money that was issued to the American people. We issued $5 trillion. That's something like, let's call it 15,000 a head. Mm-hmm. Did anyone get 15,000 in stimulus checks? No, you got maybe $1,000 or $2,000. And so blaming the inflation on the stimulus checks is just completely wrong-headed.
All right. Well, we will see you down the road. That's all we have today for Meet the Press Reports this week and for season 6. But we're going to be back in the fall with a new season. But until then, you can see any and all of our Meet the Press episodes from our 6 seasons anytime you want on Peacock or YouTube. And as always, thanks for watching. I'll see you here next time. And of course, I'll see you Sundays on Meet the Press.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.